Hello and welcome to Byjus Exam Prep IAS. I welcome you all to today's Hindu analysis. Before we take up the important articles from the Hindu newspaper, an important reminder once again, we are now on Telegram. If you want to join our Telegram channel, all that you have to do is scan this QR code or use the link given in the description of the video. As a part of this group, you will get all the latest current affairs updates for the UPSC examination from our side. Now let's begin with the newspaper for the day. And the biggest news that we have being covered all across the media is INS Vikrant. India's first ever indigenously built aircraft carrier is now officially a part of the Indian Navy. It was commissioned when the Prime Minister was present at an amazing ceremony that took place in Kochi. Now, I'm sure since yesterday you have seen each and everything about Vikrant in the news being covered all across the country. The Prime Minister gave a big speech in which he talked about how the Indian government has been trying to indigenize our defense sector in the country. And having India's first indigenous aircraft carrier is a big step in that direction. As you know, it was in Feb 2009 that we first started the process of actually building INS Vikrant. In August 2013, the ship was launched for the first time in water. The basin trials were completed in November 2020, and finally the commissioning took place on 2nd of September 2022. This now makes India one of the very few nations in the world that have the capacity and capability to build their own aircraft carriers. Now, INS Vikrant, the name is old because we used to have an INS Vikrant earlier as well. In fact, whenever you talk about the 1971 war, we talk about the amazing role played by INS Vikrant in tilting that war in India's favor. However, that was not an indigenously built aircraft and that has now retired. This INS Vikrant is kept on the same name as the old INS Vikrant, but it is now an indigenously built aircraft carrier. Right now, the Indian Navy has only one aircraft carrier. From 2013 to 2017, we had two aircraft carriers, one called INS Virat that was acquired from UK, while INS Vikramaditya was taken from Russia. INS Vikramaditya is still in service, while INS Virat has retired, it has decommissioned. Now with INS Vikrant coming up, Indian Navy will again have two full-fledged carriers at its disposal. This ship has a lot of very important specifications that you must learn. The estimated cost of this project was about 20,000 crore rupees. It will have a displacement capacity of 42,800 tons and it has been designed indigenously by Navy's Warship Design Bureau and built by the public sector shipyard called the Kochi Shipyard Limited. This is something to be proud of. This ship is capable of operating an air wing of 30 aircrafts, means as many as 30 aircrafts can be accommodated over this aircraft carrier, including the MiG-29K fighter jets, the Kamov-31 early warning helicopters as well. It has a capacity that will allow it to travel over long distances before refueling. So much so that it can actually cover 7,500 nautical miles before the need for refueling actually arrives. So it can cover distance from Kochi to Brazil without any refueling. Now, if you look at nations around the world that have their own aircraft carrier, this is a graph that gives you a good indication. US, as you can see, leaps and bounds ahead of any other country. Although this data is from 2019, but it has not really changed that much even in the present context. USA has 11 aircraft carrier and some of them are huge, much bigger than any other aircraft carrier with any other nation. China also operates two aircraft carriers. Then we have Italy, UK, Russia, India. India now, as you can see, would have two aircraft carriers. Now, the government of India has been trying indigenization of a lot of things in the defense forces. There has been a lot of focus on indigenization of the Navy as well. The word indigenization means local manufacturing. Produce whatever you require locally within India without being dependent on any other nation. Now, there are a lot of challenges because of which the indigenization process is usually slow. For example, first problem is that we are still dependent on a lot of components from outside the country. Now, when you talk about the Navy ships, you usually talk about three categories: float, move, and fight. Float means those components that are required just to keep the ship floating. Move means those components which are required to move that ship. And fight, as you can understand, talks about the weaponry. All these are different categories of components that are required in one single ship or aircraft carrier. Now, while we have been able to achieve 90% indigenization, the float category components, for move category we have only reached 60%. For fight category we have only achieved 30% of indigenization. For other things we are still dependent on importing. The government's aim is to achieve 90% target in all these three categories. Then we also have a challenge from China that is increasing its influence in the Indian Ocean year after year. We have seen how they have been invested in many countries around India, including Sri Lanka as well. Then a lot of defense projects, and not just Navy, Air Force, Army, all these projects actually suffer from a lot of cost and time overrun, meaning that the deadline for most of the projects is not met. There are a lot of delays, there's a lot of postponement that is usually seen. We saw what happened with Tejas. Even when we actually import something, thankfully Rafale was on time, but usually when you give an import order from Russia, again you would see a lot of delays. With delays, the cost also increases, which is also a problem in the defense sector. Then we also have a problem of outdated submarines. Yes, our focus right now is on the aircraft carrier, but even the submarines that we have are very, very old. The Navy currently has 15 conventional submarines, each of which requires a braking surfaces to charge its batteries, meaning that all of these have to come over the water surface to actually recharge their batteries, which puts them in danger. The high quality submarines, the latest ones, are the ones that don't need to come over water in order to recharge their batteries. That is also something that we have to focus on. Now, as we discussed, there are three types of components mainly when you talk about any ship: float, move, and fight. We have achieved 90% indigenization in the float category. For move and fight components, we are still working day and night. For fight components, we only have been able to achieve 30% of indigenization, while the remaining components come from outside the country. The next article that we have here is written by Mr. Rakesh Su, the former diplomat who has served as the Prime Minister's Special Envoy for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation as well. He says that the NPT, that is the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, doesn't look to be in good hands. Why? Recently, the 10th Review Conference of Parties was held. So, this NPT treaty says that after every 5 years, there will be a review meeting that will be held. So this meeting was supposed to happen in 2020 but got delayed because of COVID. So in 2022, finally, we had the 10th review meeting of the NPT. The problem is that this meeting actually ended without any consensus document coming up from the member nations. As per the author, the bigger nations, the more powerful nations, the permanent members of the Security Council, they talk a lot about nuclear non-proliferation. They say that we won't be misusing our nuclear power plants or nuclear weapons, but the reality is something quite different. None of them are ready to make sacrifices. None of them are ready to take steps to make the world a better place. He says that this is not a new thing, that there is no consensus built on NPT. But the difference is earlier, whenever we had this issue of NPT not going forward, it was mainly because countries such as Iran, Israel, etc., they had an issue where other nations did not believe them. While US, Russia, China used to be on one side, other nations such as Iran, West Asia, etc., were on the other side. However, this time it is different. This time, the reason why there has not been any consensus is because Russia and West have not been able to reach any consensus. We have discussed this earlier as well, how Europe's largest nuclear power plant in Ukraine is under the Russian occupation for many months now. Because both the sides are actually attacking that nuclear power plant, trying to gain control over it, there is a real fear that some nuclear disaster might take place very, very soon in this plant. As you would have seen in the newspapers also, the IAEA team recently visited this nuclear power plant and said that we must take steps to remove all this attacking posturing from the two sides, and we must leave this nuclear power plant alone if we don't want any disaster. Now, ideally, NPT should have been in place to actually protect these kind of disasters, but that has not happened. The authors say that if you look at the objectives of NPT, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty that came into being in 1970, there were three main objectives. One main objective was to divide the world into two parts. One which is nuclear power nations. Nuclear power nation means P5, the permanent members of Security Council. Those five nations that before 1970 had already tested their nuclear power plants. The other category was non-nuclear nations. So the first objective was no new nation will now test their nuclear weapons. Those who already have nuclear weapons, they will be the only ones. Second objective was that even the nations that have their nuclear energy and nuclear weapons, they will share technology with the other nations. The other nations will be told that you don't need to do any research, we will share the technology. And the third objective was that even these P5 nations with time will surrender their weapons. Or with time, we will have a time when we don't have any country with nuclear weapons. These are the three main objectives of the NPT. Again, number one, apart from P5, other nations will not have nuclear weapons. Second, P5 nations will share their technology. And third, with time, even the P5 will actually go into disarmament. But in reality, has it happened? Not really. Second and third have not really been achieved any way whatsoever. For the first one, the author says that there has been partial success. Why? Because out of the non-nuclear nations, only very few of them, like India, Israel, North Korea, and Pakistan, have actually acquired nuclear weapon technology. So this is considered as a success. That out of so many nations across the world, only these four outside the NPT have been able to acquire the nuclear weapons. But the author says that there have been no negotiations or discussions on the other 2 points. The big nations, the P5, never talk about reducing their armaments. We did have some treaties between USA and Russia about reducing their nuclear disarmament, but those treaties don't really work now. Same with China, same with France, same with UK. We don't even talk about what is the road plan for the future. How do we actually reduce the nuclear weapon stockpile with these nations? There is no discussion on that. Also, no one talks about sharing of technology as well. The big nations only want to talk about the very first point, and that is why nations such as India do not agree with the NPT. Now, as I discussed, US Russia in the past have signed various treaties aimed at disarmament. However, most of them have now expired. The only Russia US treaty that is in force right now is called the New START Treaty, that imposes a ceiling of 700 nuclear weapon launchers and 1550 warheads. This treaty will come to an end in 2026, and most probably there will not be any extension of this as well, considering the present situation between the two sides. China also, the other power that has a lot of nuclear weapons, they have never been interested in curtailing their nuclear weapons or having any discussion about that. The blame should not just go to Russia and China. Even US has been trying their nuclear modernization program of 30 years. They are trying to provide credible deterrence against any aggression. In fact, they are justifying developing and deploying more usable low-yield nuclear weapons. On the other hand, Russia and China have been focusing on building hypersonic missiles. So rather than going ahead and accepting the principles of NPT, of nuclear disarmament, of reducing their stockpile, all these superpowers are actually going one step ahead, and we are in an era of nuclear weapon race once again. There are some other treaties that have been signed apart from the NPT. In fact, the non-nuclear power nations thought that we should come together to sign our own treaty. That is how a treaty on prohibition of nuclear weapons was actually passed in 2017. However, the powerful nation, the P5, rejected this and said that nothing will actually come out of it, and they were actually true. Without the concurrence and the support of the real world powers, the P5 nations, there is a very little chance that any other nuclear treaty will actually be successful in implementing something useful. The 1996 Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty also has not come into force because two of the world's powers, USA and China, have still not ratified this. So there is a lot of talk by US, by China, why is India not signing the NPT? But when it comes to their own signing of the treaty, such as the CTBT, they have themselves not shown that courage to go ahead and sign that. Now, although we talk a lot about the NPT, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the fact remains that there are many other treaties around the world. focusing on the question of nuclear weapons. Let me give you a few examples. There is something called the Convention on Nuclear Safety that mainly talks about operating civil nuclear power plants based on land with high safety standards. We also have a joint convention on safety of the spent fuel management and safety of radioactive waste management that talks about how the fuel waste from the nuclear power plants will be disposed, how no country will transfer it to the other country. Then we have some treaties that talk about making certain parts of the world nuclear free. For example, we have the Rarotonga Treaty, which is also called the South Pacific Nuclear Free Zone Treaty. Then we also have the Treaty of Bangkok, which is a treaty on Southeast Asia nuclear weapon free zone. As the name suggests, these treaties say that this part of the world, this region of the world, will remain free of any nuclear weapons. The next article that we have here is written by a former special DGP of Chhattisgarh Police, where he says that India must be ready to face the cyber security threats which are taking a real shape now. If you remember, just a few days back, we had discussed about the recent report of NCRB, the National Crime Record Bureau. In their report of 2021 crimes, the NCRB says that year after year, we are seeing an increase in the number of cyber crimes. In 2016, the number was 12,317. In 2020, the number went above 50,000 cases. These are just the cases registered. Many of the other cases might not even be registered with the police. Now, the author here says that there is a need to tackle this challenge, and for that, police, judiciary, government, all of them have to work together. The first question he deals with is that over the past few years, the judiciary has been more open to accepting electronic evidence. So if you go back a few years, you would see that judiciary usually did not accept any electronic evidence in any case. That is why solving cybersecurity crimes became so difficult. How will you present evidence such as who was online when, what was the IP address, what was virtual private network? Because in most cases, judiciary did not admit any electronic evidence. But now, at least in the Arjun Pandit Rao Khotkar versus Kailash Kushan Rao Gorantyal case, court has said that we will be open to accepting electronic evidence as well if the original record cannot be procured. Now, the responsibility as per the author lies with both the center and the states. States, because it is in the state list that we find police and public order. Center's responsibility lies in the fact that the IT Act and other major laws to fight against such crimes are made by the parliament. So both these governments have to come together to resolve these issues. The center government on its part has set up something called the I4C, which is the Indian Cybercrime Coordination Center under the Ministry of Home Affairs, especially to fight against cyber crimes. But the reality is that people who are conducting these cybercrimes, the hackers and other experts, are usually one step ahead of the authorities. And there are various reasons for that as well, which the author is giving an example in this article itself. The author also says that the problem is there is no separate procedure for investigating cybercrimes. The procedure for those crimes remain the same as other crimes, which is not feasible. Now, the good part is that in 2018, a 5-judge committee was formed in the month of July that had to give guidelines of how digital evidence should be accepted by the courts. The committee gave its guidelines in November 2018. However, those have not been converted into law. These guidelines or these suggestions have not really been accepted or given the force of the law by the government so far. So that is why even that step has not been fulfilled by the government of India. Now, the author here points out certain problems in the existing system and why are we not able to tackle the issues of cyber crimes. The first big issue as per the author is the shortage of the technical staff. Understand things from the point of view of a regular police officer. A regular police officer whose academic background may be in commerce, literature, management, he or she became a part of the police force because they were able to clear that examination. Meaning that their background might not be technical in nature. They might not be in a position to handle complex issues such as cyber crimes. Meaning that they need specific training and expertise in this. That is where the state government has to build their capacity. The state governments must build separate cyber police stations so that they can track these kind of issues and resolve them. In fact, the IT Act of 2000 does insist that the offences of this act should be investigated by police officer of the rank of inspector or above that. But the fact is that the number of police inspectors in most of the districts are very, very limited, and the number of cases are very, very high. So usually most of the field inspections are carried out by sub inspectors only. This is a direct violation of this act. The other problem is that even though we do have certain cyber labs, their upgradation is missing, because all of that requires a lot of funding from the side of the government, expertise, which is missing because it's not high on the government's list of priorities. The third problem is about localization. Let's take a very simple example. Let's say a person goes to the police station, files a complaint that wrong information about me is being spread on a social media website. Now, when you talk to the social media website and the police ask them from where did the information originate, they will say that it originated from some other country. Now, the Indian rules will not apply there. How to take that information down if it originated in some other country, if it is stored in some other servers, that becomes an issue. So when these crimes are of transnational nature, this is when there is a need for data localization. If the data servers are in India, only then they will be covered under the law of the parliament. If the data servers are placed outside the country, as is the case with most of the social media websites, they are not covered under the IT Act, which is why the government of India has been trying to push as many of these companies to put their data servers in India only. Now, wherever there is a problem, it also gives rise to an opportunity. Now, what is the opportunity in this? Increasing number of cyber crimes has given a push to the business of cyber security companies. So there are many companies right now in the market that are selling their products, claiming that they will be able to stop the cyber crimes. Claiming that if your computer gets hacked or if your systems get hacked, our product will help you to retrieve that information. So with increasing cyber security issues, even the cyber security product industry is growing year on year. That is because the need for having such software has also increased. So this is where there is an opportunity as well for these kind of companies as their businesses are growing. Now, recently, NASSCOM, and I'm sure all of you would have heard of NASSCOM, NASSCOM actually made a committee called the Data Security Council of India. The purpose of making this committee was to give certain guidelines to help the government and other companies of how to prevent cyber security issues. These guidelines were given in the year of 2020. Let me share these with you to actually give you an idea of what these guidelines were. The report of this committee was titled National Cyber Security Strategy, and this is what they suggested. They talked about the large-scale digitization of public services, how the government should go ahead and ensure most of its services are digitalized. They talked about having a robust supply chain security system. They talked about giving a further push to digital payment system, of ensuring security of small and medium businesses especially, of ensuring that critical information infrastructure is protected, so on and so forth. They also suggested that most of these things will require a lot of money, so there needs to be about 0.25% of the annual budget of the government going into these kind of things, which should be raised up to 1%, especially for the concept of cyber security. We also need to complement this with ensuring research, innovation, skill building, development, and crisis management also whenever we are facing the problem of cyber security. This is just a report given by Data Security Council of India, which has not really been implemented or accepted by the government so far. Do remember, this is not a government agency. This is an initiative from the NASSCOM. The next article that we have is again related to INS Vikrant only, but from slightly different point of view. There are same details that you find in the very first article. Now it just says that our next focus should be on building India's own fighter air jet, which is of much higher capacity as compared to Tejas. Now Tejas fighter jet that we have is a one engine air jet. It's a light combat aircraft. Now the focus has to be on building a heavier twin engine deck based fighter jet. The author here says that INS Vikrant will be able to accommodate MiG-29K fighter jets, and Navy is also showing interest in procuring the marine version of the French Rafale planes or the American Super Hornet planes. However, if we have to ensure that we fulfill our indigenization plans along with Vikrant, We need to now put our focus on building India's own twin-engine deck-based fighter jet. Now, the good part is that in the past few years, India's attempt of indigenization of defense sector has actually given a lot of good results. We have seen an increasing number of weapons being made in India itself. We have also seen some of our weapons being bought by other nations in South Asia specifically. The defense production has seen a major push. This will also be extremely helpful for the government in saving its foreign exchange reserves in the long run, since defense and crude oil remain two of the biggest spenders on the government's purse. So, actually ensuring that most of the things are produced and bought in India will be great in the long run. This infographic also has a lot of details about how the government of India over the past few years has been trying to ensure that defense acquisition from outside the country drops down and we increase the number of weapons that we buy within the country. Usually, when you see international lists such as the one published by SIPRI, which says that India is the largest importer of weapons in the world, this is mainly because countries such as USA, China, they buy many more weapons as compared to India, but they don't have to import it. They buy it from their local industry. While India is at the top of SIPRI list usually in terms of importing weapons from outside the country, we don't spend the largest amount on our military by any stretch of comparison. USA and China, for example, spend much more money as compared to India every single year on their defense requirements. The next article that we have is another very important development that took place yesterday when the Prime Minister of India unveiled the new ensign of the Indian Navy, which has been inspired by the seal of Maratha King Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj. It was unveiled by the Prime Minister at the same function when the commissioning of INS Vikrant was done. We discussed this earlier as well. This is not the first time that the naval ensign has been changed. This is in fact the fourth such change in the naval ensign since 1950. The last remaining connection with the British colonial flag, that is a red cross in the middle, has now been taken away, and now the new ensign of the Indian Navy will have all the Indian features only. We will have the Indian flag and the top left canton of the Indian Navy ensign. Also, the national motto Satyamev Jayate is engraved in the Devanagari script. It was also included underneath the emblem. The white ensign that you have will now comprise two main components, the national flag at the upper left canton, and at the right hand side we have the navy blue and gold octagon at the center of the fly side. This twin octagonal border has been inspired from Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj's Rajmudra, or the seal of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj. If you want, this is a clearer picture. This is what was the ensign earlier. Now this is the ensign that we actually would see on the ensign of the Indian Navy. Now, a bit of information about Shivaji's navy would also be important here. As you know, the empire of Shivaji Maharaj reached the west coast after 1656. He was able to ensure that he set up a navy to protect his territories from the Siddhis and protect ports and merchant ships, also to ensure that the merchant ships are able to provide enough revenue and custom duties for his government to run properly. He wanted to establish a naval wing for his military, and his belief was seen in this line that says Jal mev yasya Bal mev tasya, which translates to he who rules over the seas is all powerful. In fact, so much was the prowess of the Marathas over shipbuilding that the naval wing of the Maratha Empire at its peak had 400 odd ships of various kinds and various sizes used for different purposes. In fact, Shivaji Maharaj had also ordered the construction of the naval fort called the Vijay Durg, which was a twin of the Sindhu Durg fort in 1653. More such naval forts were built apart from these two as well. Many of these remain unconquered and were used by the Maratha Empire for strategic purposes or watching over the enemies, especially the ones that were coming from the side of the water. These were the important articles in the Hindu newspaper today. Now a couple of practice questions. Number 1. Cyber warfare deserves as much attention from the government as does the other orthodox warfare in today's time. Elucidate. Second, assess the progress made by the government of India in achieving its defense indigenization goal. Both the questions have to be answered within 250 words each. Please use the link given in the description of the video to go to the portal where you can post your answers, check others' answers as well, and give each other feedback on their answers. Thank you so much for watching the video. Have a good day ahead.